You went to Birmingham first, is
Yeah.
that right?
I mean, Birmingham,
And then you went
church bombing and the children's marches and the park that commemorates that and all of that.
and then, did you go to Selma the next day?
No, we went, we went to Montgomery and saw the Harris House. And,
That's fascinating.
oh God, that is amazing. And the,
Martin Luther King was their neighbor, and they planned the was it the Corps? I can't remember who, but John Lewis and Martin Luther King and the lady Diane would do
Yeah.
planning in this house.
well, yeah, they,
I remember you had some really good slides.
I'm sure we still have that slide deck.
And you said you were talking.
some pictures and stuff. So,
So you could do it like, you could do a Google Slides thing if you want.
yeah, we should try to open it up. Maybe some pictures.
Maybe
so
not too many. but-
Did she talk to you? What's her name?
Valda.
Valda.
So, I mean, this is the most incredibly amazing experience. So when the only actual pastorate that Martin Luther King Jr. had was in Montgomery. His father was kind of grooming him to take over his church in Birmingham, that the father was the
I
pastor.
don't know.
No, he was in
Atlanta.
Atlanta. Yeah. So that was kind of the King family headquarters, was this big church in Atlanta that his father had built. And
I agree.
Martin got to a certain age and he accepted the call to go to the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, just as they were getting going on the bus boycott. And so that's kind of where he became one of the key leaders of the movement, was in Montgomery with the bus boycott. But Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, the geography of it's really interesting, because Dexter Avenue Baptist Church was built because this woman owned a piece of land real close to the state capitol, right in downtown Montgomery.
You can see the Capitol from the steps of the church.
That was a slave holding pen. And she wanted to get rid of this property, and she thought it was wonderful for it to become a church. So she made it available to this group that wanted to start a church from the.
Was this a black woman or a white woman?
I don't know. Probably a white woman, if she owned that piece of property in downtown Montgomery. So she sold it for like $300 to build a church on, but it was like a small chunk of a block. It was big enough to build a church on, but nothing else. So all around the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where King was a pastor, were government buildings in the state capitol. It's just right in the middle of all that. The church eventually got a parsonage, which was the typical thing you would typically build a parsonage right next to the church, but there wasn't room to do that. So the parsonage was
In a black neighborhood.
mile or two away in the black part of town.
Sure.
And so you can visit this street where the Kings lived here in the parsonage. Well, and that's where they had their children, and they quickly became friends with the Harris family, which was 2 houses down the street.
And they were nice houses.
Oh, I'm sure they were.
Yeah, and the Harrises were reasonably well off because he had the pharmacy, so they were right next to a little black business district where, and they had the pharmacy and a few other things. And anyway, so the Harrises and the Kings were just kind of friends on the street. And then as things started to heat up, Dr. Harris became quite an advisor and a leader in the movement. And then what really made their house famous was the freedom rides. So, have you ever read about the freedom rides or seen?
Of course, yeah, and I've seen the movie Selma. different things.
Right, yeah, it's separate from Selma. The Freedom Rides were
But yes, I have read about
Like so the first big effort at Freedom Ride, they get
They're trying
as
to
far as
segregate. They were trying to force, they were trying, I'm sorry, they were trying to integrate. Hey, how are
Hey,
you?
Nancy, oh, it's so nice to have you back.
The
yes.
bus stations, right? They were
Well,
trying to,
the buses, so 5 years after the Montgomery bus boycott,
This
which
has been a
was,
formal debrief.
we're doing the debrief. You probably remember the Freedom Rides.
I'm sorry?
You remember the Freedom Rides of 1961?
Oh, I'm not that old. She was a child then.
that is the perfect answer. I'm copying that. I am stealing that, Nancy.
No, actually, Ross and I had a conversation about that. And I reminded him how he had 2 children. And he decided not to go, but he really wanted to go.
He,
Of course he did.
well, I
What
saw,
a guy.
one of the things I learned was, I grew up in American Baptist churches and we kind of heard about this stuff in the news and stuff. Didn't talk about it at church very much. Most of the Freedom Riders that eventually made it into this Montgomery situation were from one college. It was like Western Tennessee or something, because they were veterans of. They had already done a movement to desegregate the lunch counters and other things in Nashville, and so and in other places in Tennessee. So the state of Tennessee was mostly desegregated. The city buses in Montgomery were now desegregated because of the Montgomery bus boycott. But the interstate
Bus lines.
interstate bus lines had been taken to court, and there was a federal court order that
They had to
they
desegregate.
had to desegregate, but they hadn't done it yet. And so
How'd you win?
I do it. Welcome.
the Freedom Riders were like, we're going to go get on a bus with an integrated group of like Black students. We're going to go get on a bus initially it was Washington, D.C., and then go south and try to go down through Birmingham and Montgomery and end up in Jackson, Mississippi. And just kind of walk in and have this integrated group of college students sit down in areas that were supposed to be whites only, similar to what they'd done with the lunch counters in Nashville and other places. So it took me, after watching the documentary for a while, it finally took me, I got the timeline right and realized all this other stuff had already happened. This was like, the next step. They weren't trying something new.
No.
They were just trying to extend the gains that had been made so far to other stuff. Well, they came down, they got as far as Birmingham, kind of stumbled through there. And then when they tried to go to Montgomery, a crowd met them at the Greyhound station and just beat the crap out of them. And by this time, the whole country's watching. All the governments are arguing over what entity should be responsible for trying to maintain some sort of order here. The governor of Alabama, who had been a supporter of Kennedy, went and hid somewhere. He didn't want to. He didn't want to get in the middle of it, and so the mob was just on their own. They were able to just put an end to that freedom ride. So now you've got all these beat up college students in Montgomery and trying to figure out how to defuse the situation. They get spirited away into hiding to where the public doesn't know where they are, while Dr. King and all the governors and mayors and police chiefs and everybody are making phone calls to try to work it all out. Well, they all went to the Harris house.
Oh,
And that's where all the Freedom Riders hid for 4 days. King didn't still live down the street at that point. He had his pastorate in Montgomery had ended in 1960. He was now just kind of freelance leading the civil rights movement. But the Harris house, good sized house, was able to hide all these 25 beat up writers and in this house. And there was a little like attic room that was totally invisible from outside the house, which was kind of the war room where Dr. King and the other leaders spent all their time strategizing and making phone calls and stuff. But the rest of the house had enough room for 25 kids, young people to hang out and
They took care of it.
and kind of nurse their wounds and what's amazing is it's virtually preserved. The Harris family continues to own this house.
Wow.
And they realized that it was such a
Historically significant.
What Harris family is this?
it's this Harris family, they were neighbors of the Kings in Montgomery. So that the parsonage that Martin Luther King and Coretta and then where they had their children when he was a pastor in Montgomery. The Harris house was 2 houses down the street, and they were just neighbors and friends. I did buy her book, by the way. I should have brought that. I didn't know we'd be talking about this so much, but so not only was the house preserved, like to make it look like it did in 1961, which is a long time ago.
Yeah.
And they still live there. I mean, people in the family still own this house and still live in it.
They
But
let people come.
and just a few years ago, they started opening it up for groups like this that they think will benefit from it.
Why?
So then, I mean, what's really fascinating about the inside of this house is that Dr. Harris, Mr. Harris, I don't know if he was a doctor, he was a pharmacist. You know?
He called himself doctor,
Yeah.
and they called him doctor,
Yeah.
but that was a title of honor.
Yeah. A pharmacist is pretty close to a doctor. Anyway, he had remodeled the pharmacy that was just around the corner a couple of years earlier, and he decided to take out the lunch counter. You know, it was typical for a drugstore to have
That's so
a lunch counter, and he maybe just wanted to make, have more room for other stuff. I didn't say why he did that, but all of the fixtures from the lunch counter came into the house. So you go into the kitchen of this house, and it's the closest thing to a dining table is this counter with the round stools that spin that are bolted to the floor. There's a big range hood in the middle where there's both the typical range and the grill that they had in the lunch counter under this range. And you go and you sit in the kitchen and you listen to them talk, and you can see how they managed to feed 25 people and more. I remember when it was time to make spaghetti and feed everybody, there were probably 30, 35 people in the house. And then the person explaining all of this to you, her name's Valda. She was a 13-year-old girl in this house, living in this house when all of this was going on. And she did write a book. I picked up a copy of it. It's called Just a Neighbor. And so she just explained how those 4 days went, and she'd like say, "Oh yeah, you just put your butt down where Dr. King sat for a while." Like, that was probably the most amazing thing in the whole thing. It was just so real. It was just like being in 1961. It's to be in that kitchen. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with all this.
That's okay.
Anyway, that's the first place we went in Montgomery. It's the Harris house.
And then did you not do the National Memorial?
Yeah, no,
Memorial? Was that the last day?
We kind of ended with that stuff. So, another really significant thing, last Sunday, as I was driving to church, listening to NPR, they were doing a story about Joanne Baldwin.
Joanne Bland.
Joanne Bland, who was this grandma in Selma, who spent the last 60 years driving people around Selma and describing what happened in, what year was the Selma March? That's
65. Was it 63 or 65?
Yeah. So, yeah, different event.
She
Yeah.
was 13. When she walked across the bridge on Blaze.
Yeah.
And by the time she was 11, she had been arrested 13 times. She, because in Selma, most of those folks were domestics and they couldn't not go to work. And so they would send their children to protest at the courthouse, trying to get the right to vote. And
Right.
so they'd arrest the kids.
So with different events, the Selma to Montgomery March, which they had to try 3 times before they were actually successful in doing it. And we learned all about that and walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
That's Holy Grail.
So Joanne Bland, I had heard this, that Aisha Roscoe on Sunday mornings on NPR, she had done a story just a couple of years ago of riding around Selma with Joanne Bland and kind of doing it live and hearing the stuff. Well, they kind of recapped that story last Sunday because Joanne Bland had just died. And so kind of talked about her and her life and then replayed part of the original story of her driving the reporter around Selma and stuff. So we get to the pilgrimage last week and
Yeah.
and the leader's like, so on Friday, we were going to go to Selma on Friday, but, and ride around with Joanne, but we can't do that. Joanne has just passed away.
Suddenly, apparently.
Yeah. It was,
The other thing that happened to Joanne was her, she lost her mother because I think her mother had had a difficult pregnancy. I think that was the issue. And she needed a transfusion and they had to wait for black blood. They wouldn't give her white blood and she died.
yeah.
That's how she lost her mom. I mean, Brian Stevenson is my hero.
Yes.
That man is my hero. And, one of the things he says very clearly is that he is a product of Brown versus the Board of Education, that his parents could only complete, and Brian is 66. Okay, so I'm assuming probably he's already lost his parents. I'm 72, but think about the fact that Brian's parents couldn't go to high school because there wasn't a colored school in Maryland. Brian got to complete his education because they forced, the rule of law forced that county to allow colored children to go to high school. His parents, not because they weren't smart, not because they didn't deserve an education, but because that was still going on.
So when did Texas schools integrate?
I don't know, but I will look it up. I'm sure they were behind. I'm gonna, you know what I want us to do? I'm gonna just briefly, I'm not gonna do everything
We had
because.
planned stuff. We were just chatting. So
Okay,
Right,
well,
so-
what I,
What in the chatting part, because that was really good.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have this handout,
I turned off the fan noise.
but
Okay.
if you would rather have live links, because this has links to some interviews and videos. If you'd rather have live links, if you'll give me your email address, I'll send you live links.
You know,
The
you know
one-
what I
Give
was
it to
thinking,
me and then I can.
you know what I was thinking about doing? I was gonna do a more complete newsletter.
That'd be
article
great.
From the Thursday News Blast about all this, and we could put
All the
all of
links.
these links in the newsletter. And then we
One,
don't,
the one I would tell you,
Special news blast on this too. We could do that to keep it, if it gets too long.
Yeah.
You could also do a special.
yeah,
the, the two of these links are to interviews with Brian Stevenson, and the one with Mel Robbins. The link I had is terrible because it's got all the ads in it. So we need a link that doesn't have all those commercials. But what I would say is, I know it's hard to sometimes want to go sit down at the computer. It's worth it. It's so worth it to hear Brian Stevenson, because he is not only eloquent, he is intelligent, he is kind, he would give you hope.
What's his role in this? Did he do your trip? Was he like involved with the
Brian
trip?
Stevenson is the guy that founded the Equal Justice.
Oh, he wrote, yeah.
Yeah, the Equal Justice Initiative.
Yeah, yeah.
He is, and these are recent interviews with him.
Oh, nice.
so these are T-shirts from
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 the
the gift shop.
The Legacy
One
Museum.
at there's, yeah, there are 3 different. Well,
sites, yes,
yeah, 3 or 4. but depending on how you count.
yes.
We're just making a list of emails.
Texas schools began integrating 54, but it's a long process, major, yeah. So, major towns like Dallas and Houston didn't begin until 61, with many schools remaining segregated until court ordered desegregation in 1970.
I lived in southern Louisiana when I was in second, third, and fourth grade, and we went to segregated schools.
Yeah.
That would be 63.
Well, and I lived in a sundown town in Detroit area.
And I didn't know what a sundown town was. Okay, I want to,
My friend Mark, who grew up in Fort Worth area, talked about, and he's like maybe 3 years older than you are. Said that he went to high school. Things were, I don't know whether it's officially segregated or de facto segregated
right,
at the time he went to high school. But he talked about how he and his friends like to go out on Friday night and go over to the black school and watch their football games because they had better marching bands.
better.
Anyway, go ahead. I think we have about 20 minutes before we need to probably break for dinner.
I want us to pray together first. And this is a Howard Thurman prayer that I've adapted to our current language a little bit. I loved Howard Thurman, but he preceded the whole.
Yeah.
Keep me alive. Keep alive in me the forward look, the high hope, the onward surge. Let me not be frozen either by the past or the present. Grant me, O patient God, your sense of the future, without which all life would sicken and die. So, when Dan asked me to do this, I think what he asked me to do, why he asked me to do it is because at some point I said my civil rights pilgrimage had given me some tools that were helping me now. And what I confess to you, and I want you to understand, I'm not as well read as a lot of like Dan and Rick and Diane Bender. I'm not that. I am not a brave and courageous person. I am not that. I'm a fear-based person. That's my personality. But in the past year, after our current president won the election, and I know you've probably heard me say this, I kind of had to go, I covered up is what I did.
Mhm.
It was like I was under the covers because I was afraid of the news.
Oh, yeah.
And And I would say to myself and to others when I said, I can't watch the news anymore. I just can't watch it. I would plead a mental health excuse. And I've been doing a personal word. I don't know, Diana Kaysen, the person that led your pilgrimage, started me on a word, picking a word for a year. Instead of doing a list of resolutions, I pick a word. And the word I got out of the star words this year was not my word. My word was resilience. And I decided I had to try harder. And then Minneapolis happened. And I knew that I couldn't cover up anymore. So I went to some meeting, a meeting in McMinnville. I've gone to some little protests. And the meeting in McMinnville was led by a wonderful Hispanic woman who is closely tied to people that have been dramatically impacted by ICE. And, she's trying to gather some folks to volunteer. And so I went. And what I realized in those moments was what I realized at the beginning of the civil rights pilgrimage was that I come from this place of privilege. And what I didn't know at the outset of the civil rights pilgrimage, but that I know now, is that is actually a burden to come from that place of privilege, because it keeps me separate from things that I don't want to be separate from. So when we sat down at the beginning of our pilgrimage, Clara Esther was part of our pilgrimage, and she was the woman that I met who actually witnessed Martin Luther King's assassination. And the other African-American woman who was on our pilgrimage listened to Clara's story about that night standing in the parking lot of Little Rain Hotel. And Therese, who wrote this book, Therese is a spiritual director in Washington, D.C. Her husband worked for the Washington Post, and Therese was moderator of her presbytery. So she describes herself as a contemplative. But what she very kindly said to us at the beginning of this pilgrimage was there was cognitive dissonance. And she said it in that lilting, we have cognitive dissonance. And I'm puzzling over what she means. And she said, you are trying to understand something that you've never been part of. And we are here to see what happened to our families and our ancestors. Mm-hmm. And that is a cognitive dissonance. So I also had to come to terms with the fact that I was asking people who had been burdened by the degradation and the humiliation in their lives. I was asking them to help me understand it. How cruel was that? Unintentionally. But again, you don't understand the burden that your privilege actually puts on you. And I keep unraveling that thought.
You reminded me of one point I want to get into.
Okay.
And I'm forgetting exactly where it came from. But I think it was in one of the books we read was called Reconstructing Christianity. And it's by Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, who is kind of the white guy partner of William Barber in the Poor People's Campaign. He's also from North Carolina, also raised in a kind of segregated world, who is now just an extreme advocate of the way forward is for white people and black people to protest together, to march together into the future. And that upsets all the paradigms. And that's kind of what the Poor People Campaign is all about. And he said, at one point he was talking to a black friend and he was expressing his frustration that he just doesn't seem to be able to get through to white people. You know, it seems like, you know, if you just show them this, is that, you know, they'll come to the next march. And the black friend said, you're not just trying to educate them about history. You have to tell them that their mamas lied to them. And that one has just really been stuck in my mind, but it was his way of saying that the culture that's been passed down in often very subtle ways that reaffirm their white privilege was based on a bunch of lies. And you basically have to come to terms with the idea that in one way or another, to live in that culture, your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and so on passed on lies from one generation to the next. But he had that very short, succinct way of putting it. You're trying to convince them that their mom has lied to them. And that's not the same thing as giving them a history lesson.
Okay.
Right. In these videos, Brian Stevenson says, okay, so tell me how you reacted to this week's news.
About Iran?
Just tell me how you've been feeling about the news. How do you feel about the news? Any news?
You're talking about the present news, right?
I am.
Well, first of all, I feel like I have absolutely no confidence in any reports or anything. It's like I have a sense of complete disbelief in the administration. I don't believe anything that comes out of the federal government at this point. So all of the news media like CNN, CBS, Fox, all the ones that are closely aligned with them, it's just like, well, whatever. They're saying whatever, and it's
How's it making you feel?
well,
Discouraged. Just,
angry and like,
Yeah.
it does make me motivated to, what should we be doing as a response? Because I completely feel disconnected from, I feel like we have stories being told.
My go-to feeling is always fear. I mean,
Fear.
it's fear.
Yeah, I don't feel afraid, but
Um,
I feel afraid for people though, who are vulnerable.
Mhm.
I do feel that.
and it's hard not to feel hopeless.
yes.
Brian Stevenson, you got to watch these videos because what he says is that the way the enslaved people survived that degradation and that humiliation was by not giving in to anger and fear.
Yeah.
Don't give in to anger, don't give in to fear. And he has lived his life this way. This man must work. You know, if there's 24 hours in the day, he's probably working 22 of them. I don't know how he goes the way he goes and does what he does, but he said because they insisted on that they insisted on conducting themselves without giving in to fear and without giving in to anger, that he is required to do the same thing. And he's very clear about that. So you're never going to hear him say some of the things I would say about the current president. He would not do that.
Right.
Because he would not allow himself to conduct himself that way. I think there's a lot to learn from that. He said that because enslaved people really believed that they deserved to be free, that they had a belief and a sense of self that they were worthy. They had to figure out a way not to internalize the message that was being given to them. Howard Thurman, in earlier years, said, don't let difficult people or difficult situations, okay, does this sound familiar? Don't let difficult people, can you think of any? Or difficult situations, can you think of any? Don't let those define you. And I just haven't had the energy. I haven't had the chutzpah. But if I've got a group of people to work with, I'm going there. I haven't heard any of you say this, but my comment, and I've heard it a lot, is I'm tired. I'm just tired.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sick of it. And he says, Ryan Stevenson says, you can't invoke fatigue. He said, you can't, he said, that just won't work in 2026.
Right.
He says, think about the Montgomery bus boycott. Go back and look at what they did, because these are people that paid 10 cents to ride the bus to be a domestic across town in somebody's house. And they decided they weren't going to ride the bus anymore because they wanted to change the system.
So they walk.
They made their lives harder. It took meetings, it took carpools, it took black taxi drivers who would just charge a bus fare. It took an enormous amount of energy and effort, and it lasted.
But mostly they walked.
Yeah, mostly they walked. And guess what? Guess what they didn't have? They didn't have Nikes. I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
381 days.
Wow.
And some woman in the midst of that said, if you ain't tired, you ain't with us.
Yeah.
You can't invoke fatigue.
When I began my freshman year in college, Howard Thurman was dean of the chapel at Boston University.
Yes.
And I sat at his feet for 5 years. It was such a privilege. It really was. And I was so ignorant. I could have absorbed so much more if I'd just been a little bit further on.
We were all
ignorant.
He was so eloquent.
He was. And then we attended the Church for the Fellowship of All People, which he started in San Francisco before he came to Boston University. So
That church was apparently correct me if I'm wrong, the first church that was intentionally for everyone, and white, black, Asian, but also other religions.
Yeah.
Not necessarily Christianity, right? It was what it said, wasn't it? For everyone.
Yeah.
He was, he met Gandhi, and
I think he spent a year in India.
and they conversed a lot. And Gandhi said to Howard Thurman, maybe the civil rights movement, maybe African Americans will bring nonviolent resistance to America. I mean, so Howard Thurman influenced Martin Luther King Jr., James Lawson influenced Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah, he was very close to Martin Luther King Sr.
Right.
Yeah, it was,
Right. They were in school together, I think.
Yeah.
Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King Sr. Yeah.
I definitely, to deal with, I'm tired, is just to, I have to focus on one thing.
Right.
But my issue is I have to get ahead of what's next. Because it feels like history is repeating itself a bit, and I want to get ahead of what's going to happen next. How far is this going to go? And I want to get ahead of it, and I don't want to be complacent to, it can't get worse, or that won't happen again, or, somebody will fix it. People won't let this happen. You have to get ahead of it.
Yeah, that echoes a thought I've been having, particularly the last few weeks, is I think I'm getting past the point where a lot of these news stories, I've been able to kind of shelve them in a drawer by saying, well, that's easily fixed once he's gone. You know, we'll just put it back. You can take the signs down at the national park so we can put them back up. You know, it's not a big deal. But I mean, it is a big
It's a
deal.
huge deal.
But in my mind, it's fixable, you know, but now I'm getting to the point where I'm going, what is the future? What is the future that we should be trying to create? And it's not simply undoing. It's the future won't look like the past. We have to figure out what that future looks like. And the future is the only future that's actually going to work to keep this country a country is truth telling. Is to actually, like the prophets of old, you know, the way to get past all of the misery and sorrow, the exile, all the stuff is through the truth. It's not, we can't lie our way into a better future or deny our way into a better future.
And we can't afford to be tired. You know, we have to.
That's what Brian Stevenson says. You can't, you can't say that
Yeah,
anymore.
we have to find a way. Not
He
to be
just-
tired. And we're, you know, and not that it's all Trump. Obviously, he has a lot of people that agree with him, but
Yeah.
you know, we're only a year into this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we could possibly go 4 years, you know, 3 more. Well, you know, I'm assuming that is going to happen.
What I gleaned from what Brian Stevenson said about what we do, what is it that we do? You know, one of the comparisons he makes is, it's not a comparison, this is just a truth, that Black people, you know, one of the greatest evils out of enslavement was the narrative that was created about why slavery was okay. That the narrative was that Black people were not as evolved, they weren't as good. And that in this day, Black people often still experience an assumption of incompetence.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
False narrative, not fair. That's not fair.
But I remember growing up with that.
I had a father-in-law that was very, very prejudiced, but
King said something about you can't cut a man off at the knees and then give him a hard time for being handicapped.
there you go. But okay, all of those false narratives are rooted in what? In fear and in anger. So we have these current false narratives, right? Audrey, would you agree? Or maybe it was Kathy. It was Kathy. She didn't believe. She's in disbelief over what we're hearing, right? Because we do feel like a lot of what we're hearing are false narratives.
We know. We
Right.
see false narratives everywhere.
So Stevenson says what you have to do is you have to go back and you have to do honest education. You have to educate people about what really happened, and that the degradation and the humility or the humiliation of not just enslavement but segregation and Jim Crow segregation shouldn't be a burden just for the people that experienced it. It should be all of our burdens. And that those lessons, that history should be taught very clearly. So he says you got to go back and teach. And then he also says you have to get proximate. And I keep thinking, why are you using that word? Well, that's just how he is, right? But you can't understand something well at a distance. That, for me, has been the value of the civil rights pilgrimage. There is so much of that that I would have never, ever understood if I hadn't had to go stand under all those pillars that had the names of the people that were lynched, or walked into the Equal Justice Museum with the sea rolling, roiling around you and black faces coming up.
Yeah. The displays are amazing, but and we need to go. But I want to close with this little observation from like 2 days ago. We saw that museum with all, well, we saw all the stuff about the lynchings and all of the stuff that laid out the whole experience. And we walked across the street to eat lunch at a place that had, it was a buffet thing, and it was really busy, really popular. And I'm looking around and I'm going, here's where we are. We have made progress. I'm in a restaurant where there are both black and white customers, and this is the proximate thing, that unless you sit there and experience it, you don't see it. There's black and white customers, there's black and white staff, and there's a lot of bantering, joking around between them. I'm like, we have made some progress. But then I remembered, I just witnessed some behavior that might have got that guy lynched 50 years ago, or 100 years ago. And that's the proximate thing. That's where you have to get real close to it and you see it.
I'm closing.
Okay. All right, you close. You close.
Because he says you can't, and I do believe that. I think for a long time I thought I understood all of this. And there's such a difference between an intellectual understanding and understanding the way he's talking about it. The next thing he says you have to do is you have to change the narrative. And he says the way you change the narratives of fear and anger are to listen to the people, the stories of people that have so much less than we have, but they still have hope. He says hopelessness is want to say it right. Injustice prevails where hopelessness persists. If we allow ourselves to become hopeless, we are part of the problem. So we can't do that. And then he says you have to be willing to do difficult and uncomfortable things. But I'm closing on Thurman. Thurman said that without an interior work, an experience, a grounding experience of the divine, he didn't think social change could happen. So Thurman, in addition to all the things Brian Stevenson says, Howard Thurman would tell us, we still have to center down. We still have to, in whatever ways we can, have a transcendent experience that will give us courage and hope.
Yep. And that's what happens when you go to Alabama with a bunch of other people who are on the same course. Yeah.
I came back from that really wanting somebody else to go, and I got you and Rick are the only people I got to go. I'm just glad you went.
It's a commitment.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, and we will continue this conversation in some form or another in 2 weeks.
Okay.
No class next week. Art show. We don't. This room.
Oh, I was going to show you this. If you have a young person in your life, John Lewis, I can't share these because these don't belong to me. John Lewis, together with another person, did what do you call these? Graphic novels about the march.
Mhm.
So, you know, a young person would like a graphic novel,
Oh, yes, of course.
right?
John Lewis
Hey,
was
so
certainly a
these
name
on
that
your
came up
list?
over and over, wouldn't he?
Right.
Are these on your list?
These books are, and these I can loan. I'm not loaning